There we go. Okay. Sorry for the delay there. Turns out I had just muted my microphone, and that was all it was. Go figure. Okay, so right now, Kira, it seems that you're the only one in chat. We had some views that disappeared. But best not to think about that. I've got someone to talk to, and that is all I need to have a good, fruitful conversation. Obviously, this is just for you. Hope you don't mind if someone else wants to join in at some point. And hope you're having a good evening. Okay, so I did decide that I would save some of the time travel discussions for when T is available, because I think it'd be fun to have her in the discussion. But the a lot of the how does this four-dimensional time thing work discussion, instead of the wibbly wobbly, just the what does it mean, I know that she understands, and of course many other people would be interested in just that part. Basically, I don't have to reserve everything for a time travel, time machine discussion. I can have how does four-dimensional time work. But if you would like, I could tailor this more to what you're interested in, because you're the one who showed up. Otherwise, I can just go ahead and dive in. There is presumably will be a some interest in the pre-recorded version, or the recorded version of this, once it's available. So it is more power than I'm used to, more decision making than I'm. Where did I put my Sharpie? There it is. Okay, so time travel. There are really only there's two ways to slice it. There's multiversal, and there is single timeline. With variations. Um, Multiversal basically says anytime you would make a change in the timeline, uh, then you split out to a different universe. Everything just changes, and you could. It's just the other one is not really affected. You just make a new one. Whereas single timeline, you say everything has to be consistent because you've got one timeline. And so now, if we want to focus on trying to be consistent, trying to have a place where there's time paradoxes, there's just these fun intricacies of, well, you did this, but it was while you were time traveling, and therefore this interesting, quirky thing happens. That implies that you are considering this single timeline with the variation. So there could be some things where like ripple effects or whatever with it. But by and large, you're considering a consistent timeline. And so the question is, what is a timeline? If you're going to be going with a single timeline, you need to know what it is. And the fun thing is that we have a timeline, and we are time traveling. So I am a time traveler, and you're a time traveler. And in fact, this is something that you cannot change. You're always going to be traveling through time. So if you think of this as being when you were born, and then this is now, then you can think of this as the time axis. Now, what happens on these other axis is all sorts of fun things. You can keep track of pretty much anything. And so, say you get a job and you start making money. You could make this axis the how much money do you have axis, and hopefully it kind of goes up over time. Now, it might still be, just dollars and cents, depending on where you are in that timeline, but it's something you can measure. So this looks familiar, perhaps. This is a graph, a chart of where you've made this is one dimension is your wealth, and then the other dimension is time. So these are called dimensions. And then we've already made time a dimension before we've started to talk about the 4D. D here stands for dimension. And normally we think of 3D equals box. Hey Triforce, welcome. Nice to see you drop in. So we've now established that time can be a dimension, but normally we're used to 3 dimensions, but wealth can be a dimension. There's all sorts of other things that can be a dimension. But we'll go ahead and start thinking of it in terms of the 3 dimensions that we've got plus time. So normally we have a 3-axis dimension system for x, y, and z. So we're going to do that plus time. And that makes it 1, 2, 3, and 4 dimensions. Okay, so if we have this, how can we visualize it? Because if we can visualize it, then we can start thinking about it a little bit easier. And I think the best way is to start thinking not in, like we've already demonstrated this 2D one. 4 dimensions is too much for us to visualize because we have 3 spatial dimensions that we're used to, so we can't visualize anything in a 4th dimension. But we can actually, if we leave off this 3rd dimension for now and just start thinking in the world of 2D. So then now instead of time as a 4th dimension, we can say that we're doing 2D plus time. So what does that look like? Well, before we start thinking about this time as a dimension, we just have to think about what does a 2D world look like when you have 3D objects. And before we even get to that, what does a 1D world look like when it sees 2D objects? So I'm going to pull up I'll start with the physical demonstration. So we'll see if we get to the digital one. So I have here a knife. And I'm going to make what is called a scanner. So a scanner has, let's see, I want this underneath. A scanner is a way to take a line and use it to see something that is more than just a line. So if I cut this just enough so that you can see it, notice how you can see my hand through that line, but it's still just a line, right? Okay, now I'm going to make a 2D object and we're going to scan it. So here we go. We've got a triangle. I'm going to fill it in solid. And I'm going to scan it. So this is what a flatbed scanner does when it scans a document, is it has a light sensor that it scans over the image. And so as it moves, let's see if we can get closer. As it moves over the image, that black line gets wider. You can see the faint shape of the triangle behind it. I'll try and make this a little wider. There we go. That should be easier to see. So now as I scan this across, you can see that black line getting wider. Does that make sense? So this is a one-dimensional view into a two-dimensional object with 1 and 2 added together. So you got x, you got y, and you got x. So you got 2 dimensions, whereas here you've only got x. And so you can see that there. And now it's kind of fun because you know, I already drew something a little bit more complicated than the triangle with that 2D. You can scan that too and see what that looks like. Okay, so now, if that's what a 1D scan is, then we can, it's a 1D scan of a 2D object. Now we can start thinking about what is a 2D scan of a 3D object. And so to do that, we will move into a 3D tool. So I've got this little toolbox, which I will open. This is a game called 4D Toys. You can get it on Steam. And it has a great explanation, a little bit of what I was already going over. So we can just go through it. So 0 dimensions is just a single point. There's no directions to move along. If you go to this, add 1 dimension, now you've got a line. You can move along that line. If you go to 2 dimensions, now you've got adjacent lines and you can go across them. So it's perpendicular to the other row. And if we go 3D, now you've got planes that are stacked. Instead of points that are stacked into a line and lines that are stacked into a plane, into a square, now we can take the squares and stack them into a cube. That's the demonstration of the 4D stuff, which we don't actually need. But basically you can take that same idea and spread 4D spaces, or 3D spaces across. But again, we don't have to worry about that right now. So this here is a 3D scanner. It's got a 3D object, this sphere, and a 2D, you know, that line that I made, this scanner with, or I guess you can't see my camera anymore, but the line that I made with on the page, think of that here as, instead of a cut in a 2D thing, now you've got a cut in a 3D thing. So I'm going to scan along this object and take just what we call the cross section of it. So here we go, here's my scanner, and as I move it away from the center of that sphere, the circle that it's getting a cross section of is smaller. So that means this is a demonstration of 4D again. Okay, so here we go. Here's another 2D shape. See how as you move the cross section of this 2D, it looks kind of weird, right? It's hard to really think of what that shape looks like, but that is this cross section of this cube coming through that 2D area. Does that make sense? I'm going to demonstrate it again in Blender in a second. Yes, just like a CAT scan. In fact, well, depending on how a CAT scan is done, there's axial CAT scans that work differently, sort of. But if you've ever done 3D printing, each layer of a 3D print is one of those slices. And yes, certainly a CAT scan is a similar idea. They actually did computed tomography, which is what CAT scan is, CT. Tomography being the study of the full shape of something. They originally did it by slicing the tissue that they're looking at in, I'm sorry for the black screen. They originally did that with, they took something that they're trying to look at, and they literally would cut off sort of like a deli slice and take a picture of that. Move that to the side, cut off another layer, take a picture of that. And that allowed them to get a picture of every layer of the object. So yeah, really you can think of it in terms of layers of something. So I'm going to open up Blender, and we can make a layer slicing system. Really tiny Blender. There we go. So here's Blender, and we'll go ahead and what we want to do is take this shape, and I'm going to make it really narrow. I'm actually going to say 0.01. So it's really narrow. So that's our layer. And we're going to make an object that we want to slice. So I'm going to do the monkey. Hello, Suzanne. If I take this, add a modifier to do a Boolean, is what they call it. I can basically, if you've ever used Tinkercad, it's that union, subtraction, those kinds of operations. So I'm going to take the difference, or sorry, I'm going to take the union, or the intersection. I'm going to take the intersection between this little slice I made and Suzanne. And it disappears because Suzanne is still there. But if I hide Suzanne, oops, where'd it go? I might need to subdivide it first. Generate subdivide. Apologies for the momentary figure out how this works. Oh. Forward for hold. Okay. Yes. So here we go. I have a slice of Suzanne. So now if I pass Suzanne, or pass this cube over Suzanne, it's kind of hard to tell what's going on, right? But that is essentially the CT scan of Suzanne. You can see her mouth right there showing up. There's your ear. So if I can make this a lot easier to see if I make this wider. So here you can see I'm just taking the intersection there, right? So as it crosses over it, that's what you're seeing. Because I want to get the 2D, I only want one of these surfaces, so that's why I would make it narrow. So we make that real narrow, and now you can see that part of Suzanne. Okay, so now I think we understand the slicing in 3D. And I could stop here because our goal is to make a 2D animation. We just simplify our world down to say, instead of a 3D world, it's a 2D world that has time travel. And that would be enough. I could demonstrate from here. But we also want to have the chance to say when we go home today that we know that we can see in 4D. You know, we have some fun with our friends saying, did you know that I understand how 4D works, you know? So we'll go ahead and do a little bit of that, and then we'll get back to the time travel. So say we have this this shape here that's getting bigger in 2D. Well, actually, let's just start simple. So say we have a line that we then extrude out. You know, I'll demonstrate this in Blender. could use this as the opportunity for learning Blender, because this part is actually quite easy. So, welcome to Blender. We get a little mini Blender tutorial here, because I know that both of you are interested in that. So, this is Blender. It's kind of confusing. It's got lots of things everywhere. The best place to start is just kind of the UI. So we're back out even from the 4D discussion, and we'll just do a little bit of Blender. So there is a paneling system, windows. You can make a bunch of windows and move them around. You can close them by dragging from the corner and saying, I don't want that one anymore. Drag it from the corner, you can make a new one. So depending on which way you drag it in the corner, which one it does. And if I get rid of all of them, eventually I end up with just a 3D view, some toolboxes, and the menu up here. Each view, so I'll go ahead and make another one again. So I've got two 3D views here. That's what this little box in the corner lets me select what it's going to show. So normally you've got a 3D view, which is that first one, and you've got a properties view, which is this one here. And that's what it starts you off with. Those two, and then we also like to have an outliner. This shows you, so this is another window mode. This shows you what are all the objects in the scene. So Blender works on an kind of an object model. You've got objects in the scene and they have properties. And that's the basics of everything here. So I'm going to add, we can just see up here, there's the toolbars for the 3D viewport. There is an object menu. So these are our drop-down menus. There's an object and there's an add. So I'm going to add an object. So the object menu has functions and actions you can do on an object that you have selected, and then the add will let you add new objects. So the main thing in Blender is the mesh. Everything pretty much is built around the polygonal modeling, triangles that add up to make a 3D shape. So I'm going to add, so I go here, add, mesh. I'm going to add really any of these. These just determine which points are already there. So I'm gonna just do a plane, and that makes an object. Now, there's a fast way to do this, which is to, if you have a keyboard, do A, or Control A, no, Shift A. Everything in Blender is pretty much available on the keyboard, and that's where the power user, it takes a bit to get used to doing things with the keyboard, but you've always got one hand on the keyboard and one on the mouse. That way you can just do things quickly instead of having to find them in the interface. So with a Shift A, it lets me pulls up the add menu, so I don't have to go up here and then click the add. I can just say Shift A. Now, part of the reason I do this is because when I started using Blender, the menus were really hard to use and poorly laid out. So it was actually easier to learn how to do it on the keyboard than to find it in the menus. Now it's pretty self-explanatory to find things. But I've added my plane, and now there's a drop down here. The first drop down in the editor, the 3D editor, is to set the mode type for mode of interaction with these objects. So I can switch from object mode to edit mode. And again, this is something that I've never used the menu for, because I just hit the tab key to switch to edit mode. I suppose the other modes are, you use them less. So you would use that to switch which one. But tab will switch between whichever mode and edit mode. So if I'm in object mode and then hit tab, it'll go into edit mode. That's how central polygonal modeling is to Blender. Okay, so with that, I can go ahead and demonstrate what I was wanting to demonstrate. So I'm going to select all of these and delete them. Oops. I'm going to delete the... Really, any of these would work because I've selected all of the vertices, I've selected all the edges, and they're going to go together. Okay, so now I've got an empty object. It doesn't even have a point in the middle. And if I well, it used to be I could control click. I'll undo that and just keep one of them. Okay, so I've got this one point here. If I hit the E key on the keyboard, it'll extrude it. That, again, is also how important extruding is to 3D graphics. Pretty much any place you do stuff, you're adding stuff together by extruding. So if I extrude that point out, it makes a line. And if I extrude that point out, it makes, or that line out, it makes a square. And then if I extrude this square out, it makes a cube. I'll do it without the snapping. So if I extrude this, it'll make a line. If I extrude this, it'll make a square. And if I extrude this face out, it will make a cube. Okay, so what is a hypercube? What is a four-dimensional cube? We just keep doing that. Instead of selecting, so I started with one point and I selected all and I extruded out, and then I select all of those and extrude it out, and then I select all of those and extrude it out. So each of those was in a different dimension. The first one was X, the second one was Y, and the third one was Z. If I want to make this a four-dimensional cube, also called a hypercube, also called a tesseract, then I select all and I extrude. But I don't have a fourth axis in this editor. So ultimately, it probably, if I delete the faces, so this is what's called a projection. we're already here looking at a 3D projection on a 2D projection of a 3D object. By doing that extrusion of all of that whole cube, but not really having a fourth dimension to put it in, I've just squished the fourth dimension down into 2D, well, into 3D and then into 2D. So to give a better idea of what that means, I will start with this cube, and we'll go into a, we'll remove the perspective view. See, how do I... So this is an orthographic view. If I scale this down, but instead of picking just one of the three axes, I'm going to pick a way... does it not let me do that? Let me put in the camera. So if I view it from the camera angle and make this camera an orthographic camera, camera options, I'm in edit mode probably. So camera options, I'm going to make it, switch it. So this is the properties of this object, right? So I've got the camera selected. Now the properties window is showing all of the properties of that object. So I select the camera properties. These are properties specifically only to cameras. The mesh has properties specific only to meshes. So I'll pick the camera, and I'll say, instead of perspective, I'll say orthographic. Okay, so now we've got an actual camera object which has its own well, actually I don't really need the camera object, but you can at least see now we have a representation of the view we're coming from. And so now when I go into edit this, I want to scale it from, instead of along one of these axes, I'm going to scale it along the view. So this will let me scale. You'll see it looks like it's doing nothing when I scale in Z. That's because I'm actually coming from the Z is the axis coming out of my camera. So if I come from this camera, I can scale on the Z axis and then come back out, and you'll see it's flattening out towards that camera. So I'm going to do that all the way to flat, and that's what a projection is. And so we've taken that 3D object and made it flat. When you saw me extruding the 4D version of it, well, it's also flat because I'm showing it in 2D. But I don't have to flatten it all the way to 2D because we have a 3D editor. I can extrude like that and say we've only flattened it in 3 dimensions. Just like in the previous one, when I had this and I scaled it, I didn't make it I did not make this 1D, I made it 2D. So I could, you know, if I did make it 1D, it would be just like that. Anyway, So that's what the idea of extruding into the fourth dimension is. But instead of a projection, I could do a slice. So if I go back to the 3D engine that does, it's actually a 4D engine, what you saw the demonstration before with the circle and the little man. So here, these are the 2D demonstrations with this is the 3D world, and this is the 2D slice, and I can move in the 2D, I can move the 2D slice and see the 3D object. Okay, so now let's go ahead and do the same thing, but instead of with a 2D slice of a 3D object, we do the, I'll do this hyperspheres. I'll do the 3D slice of a 2D object. Now it's hard to see it because we can't turn and look at where that slice is in 4 dimensions because we only can look at the 3-dimensional slice. You know, I can turn the projection on so you can see where they are in 4D. Actually, the cube, you can see how it's extruded along in 4D. Try and get it rotated a little bit. Okay, there you go. So you can see the projection of the 4D cube that's been extruded, but there's just showing the one 3D slice. I can move along that 3D slice, or I can move that 3D slice along the 4th dimension to start seeing an idea of that 4D object, which of course we can do that projection. So you see on one side it fills that cube that we'd gotten, and on the other it fills, of course it's rotated, and it becomes hard to understand because until you've played around in this 4D world for a long time, it's hard to intuit. But one of the effects is that as things move through that 4th dimension, for instance, this hypersphere gets smaller in the 4th dimension, or smaller in 3D, because that 3-dimensional slice of the 4th dimension, just like we had the sphere makes a circle that gets smaller as you slice through it. That same idea happens with the hypersphere that gets smaller as you slice through it. Okay, I think that any more discussion of the 4th dimension as fourth spatial dimension will just be there to make your brain hurt until you start playing around in things like this, trying to think about it yourself, which you don't have to. You'll probably just be tired today. So we can go on back to our comfortable 2D slices of our 3D objects, because that will be enough to understand the time as, essentially we treat time as a spatial dimension. So I'll go back to Blender, And we'll bring Suzanne back up. So we had our slice. We don't actually need Suzanne, we just need the slice. We have a slice that goes through Suzanne. And we want to make this represent time instead of a third spatial dimension. So the only difference in a graphical perspective between time and a spatial dimension, if you set your engine up for it in this way, is that we only move through time at a constant rate. So instead of slicing and picking which slice we want to see, we just take the we want to animate, so I'll do a little more blender. We're going to pull the animation tools down. So there's a timeline here. Normally when you start a new one, it shows up at the bottom of the screen. A new file it'll be at the bottom. But if we just start with this is the object location. Where is it? Object location is at -1. So now it's over on this side. And we'll make it as big in X and Y, or X and Z as we can. So we'll just call it 500 X, 0.01 Y, and 500 Z. We set the size of this box to be like this. It'll catch everything. So we know it won't it will get everything in here. And then we add a keyframe. This says at frame 1, the location of this cube is there. And then we move forward and we go to the end of our animation, which is frame 250. We'll move this over to be at Y2. So we moved it 2 meters to Y2. And we'll add the keyframe. You just hit the I key and it saves the location. So now there's 2 keyframes here, and the animation moves along that. I believe it's got a little bit of smoothing to it. So we just, I think that disable the smoothing maybe? I'm not sure. But it's close enough. So now if we play the animation, we will get this Suzanne being scanned through time. So now we really have turned this y-axis into time. So So we no longer have the y-axis being a spatial dimension. We're using it as a time dimension. So, if this time dimension can show a slice of a 3D object, but we're trying to make an animation of a normal 2D world, what would that mean? Now, each of these is a numbered frame from 0 to 255. So, let me go ahead and hide Blender and go back to the real world camera. I have a little demonstration. Sorry. Demonstration object. Actually, I don't need any of that. Bare desk. So this is an animation. In it are 144 frames flipbook style of Bad Apple. So if I go through them, let's see, 35, 36, get them backwards, but we go through them, we can see the actions that Rimu takes. So each frame in this animation shows a slice of the action. Do you have a guess of where I'm going with this? If I have sliced it in little tiny frames, then, well, it's still a 3D time space. So this is my timeline going through. I've literally turned this video into a physical 3D object, with this being the time dimension and these being the time slices. So all of that demonstration with Suzanne, I have done with a commonly known video. Now, for the fun part, to really drive home that this is just a slice of this 3D time space, as you would. Let me put these back. 1, 2, 3, 17, 18. Okay, so if this is a 3D time space that has been sliced with time being the direction that we're slicing along, what happens if I slice instead in the other direction. So this is the same thing, the same pixels, but sliced in the opposite direction. So I can see all of what happened in that slice with the same y-axis, but the different time axis. (3D to 2D video). I'm curious. You'll definitely have to send me the link to that. Because one of the things that I get to do today is, now that there's slight interest, this video that I have here with the frames going that way is actually unlisted on my channel and has been for, I think it's coming up on its 10th anniversary. It's old. So you can, it's not edited in a way that's really something that someone browsing YouTube would find and enjoy. But some of the really interesting things are visible. Is that as you slice through here, you see on this frame, she's walked in from over on the right side. She walks into the middle, comes back, and turns around and goes out the outside. This actually shows up here because that each of these is a scan, is a slice, right? And because there's an object, this person moving through it, you get to see that same effect of the scan. And so this actually shows up where at the spot where she is, where she walks through, you can see the person. So you can make out the shape of the character because she voluntarily walked through that slice we made. Okay, so that video will be on my channel. I will make it public, and I will include a link in actually, you should be able to include a link now. Well, I'll get that later. Okay, so if I head back to Blender, this is where the fun begins. So we just demonstrated that I could, instead of moving this in this direction, I could have rotated it 90 degrees and then rotate it 90 and then moved it this way, right? That's what we just demonstrated. This is definitely the kind of thing where you think on it, many times, and slowly you get to become comfortable with it. So yeah, there's moments where it clicks, and that's just a ratchet. You're getting closer to an understanding. And in many ways, it's just a model of our world, right? So we've simplified it down to 2D so that we can think about it, and then use the concepts from what we understand about 3D things to then understand 4D and beyond in the things that we can understand. And as you then begin to understand it, now you have something else that you can reference when you think about how to understand other things. So, for instance, doing this with the slice and doing the intersection, you kind of have to understand how a Boolean intersection works. And so teaching that all at once at the same time as doing what is, a four-dimensional time, or a spatial dimension interpretation of time, obviously going to be a bit much. So I'm glad that you are able to enjoy still this brain dump. Okay, so let's do something more interesting than Suzanne. This is when it's going to really be more obvious what the nature, like, we'll actually do an animation here. So I'm going to start with a plane, and we're animating it currently along the Y, right? So I'm going to rotate that 90 in X and scale that down because we only have this cube to work in. I guess I could have made it longer, but we've already done the animation. And we're going to extrude it some. We're going to start by just extruding it from front to back. And so we should expect this to be an animation of a square that is not moving. So we go ahead and turn off the, I already rotate 90 negative Z. Okay, so if we do the animation, did we lose our animation? Yeah, it's still animated. I'm just looking at it backwards. So if we do the animation, you'll see that as it slides across, nothing really changes about this square. And we'll go ahead and take the camera because we're wanting to view it from this 2D perspective. So we'll take the camera and we will move it to not be rotated, but we'll look at it from where are we looking at it from? Oops. We need to rotate X 90. Okay, so we're going to look at it from that side. And now we've got our square, and as we move along the animation, nothing changes about it, just like we planned. Okay, well, how about we animate it? Now, instead of using the timeline with its keyframes, I've made my own because I have this is one keyframe, right? And then travel a long time. At the end, we have this keyframe. So I'm going to move this keyframe at the end here to be over to the top left of the space. Now I go back to the camera and hide. What do you think will happen? I will give chat a chance to make their guesses. Chat at the moment being Kira. So Kira, make your guess. What do you think will happen if I play the animation? It'll do the thing where the thing does it and thing. Again, I'll show you the full 3D shape of it. And we're going to be moving this line through it like this. Oops. Okay, so the result will be that if I hide this, the result is that this square will move to the top right. Oop, it is playing backwards. Play. So the square stays the same, but we moved it because if I'll turn on wireframe and show the box, so that's how we moved it, right? So we've made this animation of our own system. So instead of keyframing the square, we've made our own way to keyframe. So go ahead and start adding more keyframes. Subdivide, subdivide, subdivide. Okay, so now each of these are a keyframe. I'm going to move this one over there. Oops. Grab, Shift, Y. Okay, I'm going to move that over there, so it's got a little jaggy in it. And now as it animates, this cube goes up and over. Or the slice shows that it goes up and then over. Whee! Ooh, boom. Okay, so now if we view it from the camera and hide the pathing, we have an animation where it now takes a short detour and then goes back. And that's how time can be presented. A time dimension can be presented for a 2D space as a third dimension, but also just using it for animation. And then if you want to, you can try and wrap your brain around the idea of every place that you've been, you've left a timeline, a trail of yourself in the fourth dimension of time. So if you think of yourself as this square, then the analogy of this square moving in through its different locations, being a shape like this in 3D, then you can think of yourself as being a shape like that in 4D. Okay, so we've been time traveling this whole time. This object is experiencing the travel through time. But what if it wanted to do some time travel of its own? Like, make a time machine and start doing things that would be paradoxical, because most things only experience this 1 second per second. Well, now we get to start having some fun with abusing this time dimension. I'm going to keep this plane moving as it is for now, but I'm going to swap out this square thing for a different object in Blender. So give me a second. I will delete that and actually I'll keep it as just a circle filled in, and I'm going to add a curve. Now this curve is going to be essentially the position of the center of this object in time, is how I'm going to use it. So I'm going to use it, basically it will be the path that we extrude along. So from there to there, and then I'll rotate this 90, and we will probably scale it down just a little, and in the curve object I'm going to have it be there's a way somewhere in here to add a taper, or not the taper, is it the taper? Yes, I guess it is the taper object. Maybe? Maybe not. Maybe that's only curves. Maybe it has to be curve object. Okay, so it can't be these mesh. It would be a curve circle. And then we set the taper object to be the circle. No, it's not the taper object. Bevel? There we go. So now we've extruded along this curve. So now it will make it easier for us to have keyframes, because it will do the interpolation between them for us. And with that, we'll also need to set the cube's intersection to be does it not like curves? Mesh object. How did I do this before? You're always just well, we can just convert it to mesh and use that when we want to see it, I guess. Too bad. So we'll have to do, it won't be fully dynamic, I guess, but we can at least see how it will work when we do that work. Okay, so the reason I wanted to do this is because if you do some time travel, instead of just moving I'll get fast to this eventually. Instead of just moving in time, instead of just moving at a constant rate through time, you sometimes will back up and do, you go back in time. So here's just a normal animation. We'll hide the original Beziers and go to the camera and watch it move. So you can see this moving into that corner that we had. So this is the same thing we just demonstrated, but now we get to do some fun things, because what if instead of being just this one continuous shape, I were to take this, spin it around, and come back the other way. Now what do you think of that? Convert to mesh, hide it, hide the other one, select this one, delete that one, Okay, this is maybe a little bit too much, but okay. What do you think will happen now? Well, it's still got that move over to the left corner, but it's also gone back in time. So it already exists in two places at that slice. So if I move the slice, at this point in time, you've got a doppelganger because you went back in time. And there's two of you. So the animation for that looks like this. Hide that one. Select this and just start the animation. So now we have actually done time travel. And like Tenet demonstrated, when you meet yourself at the point where you turn around, you just disappear from everyone else's perspective. Okay, so what does this look like from the character's perspective, as it were? I'm going to make another cube, slice a cube thing. And this one, instead of being animated by keyframes of position, so the other one's moving, this one's not going to move that way. It's going to follow the same curve for the animation. So it's going to was it track? How did it follow track? So we use the maybe that's not it. So if I select the curve and parent, I can say follow path. And now this slice will follow the curve. Let's hide the hide that for now. So this line will follow, or this slice will follow the curve here. Instead of following time, it will follow it from the same perspective as the path is taking. So if I view, I'm going to make another camera. Well, actually, we can go ahead and demonstrate what that does for the slice by just watching the animation. So you can see they would notice themselves at some point, but they would continue following. They'd think of themselves as that version. And that's the other version of themselves. Because the one with the dot in the middle is the one that's actually their reference point at that moment. Now, that's their perception, right? So real time is still this one here. Did I get the wrong one? I grabbed the wrong one. this one is the one that's following that path. I don't know why this should still... Oh, I guess it's got it. Okay, does this work? Why? So this should animate both of them. Okay, so this one here, we want to delete the keyframes and add the follow path. Okay, so time is still progressing linearly, but their perception is the one that's here. So anyone else who's observing from this vantage point through time would see them like that, but they would see it from this other perspective. Now, to make that perspective a little bit more clear, I'm also going to make a camera that follows the curve. So now if I set this camera to follow the curve, and I view it from that, this is what it looks like. It's a little confusing to understand, perhaps, but because their camera is moving with them. Now, it'd be probably a little easier to understand if I had actually like drawn a stick figure or something. But you can see how it turns with that circle as it spins through space. And from the let's see, where's the, I didn't actually set that as an actual view, cameras, set active camera. Oh. View, cameras, set active. Okay, so this is the one, this is the viewpoint that is centered around following what it sees. Again, it would be easier to understand if I'd drawn a stick figure. But I think that at that point, so I can make that easier to understand visually, but it'll take some time to do. And my talking points have mostly been covered. So, any questions? probably end pretty soon. If this is now a nearly 2 hour long stream, and it is almost 4 a.m. for you. Yeah, I think I'll have to actually do an animation with a stick figure and show the two perspectives to actually try and get that point across. Because the circles just don't quite do it. Maybe if they had a time traveling beach ball or something that they were playing with, then I could just make that be the 3D part. But it does take some amount of effort to animate something. But yes, it is kind of trippy. Because if you think about it, this this here is if that circle is the surface that you're used to seeing as the outside, this is cutting across it. It's kind of, you get to see, like, say, instead of the surface, if you're a true flatlander, you can only see this orange part. But here, you start to see the insides. So as this time traveler turns around in time, you can actually see parts of them you don't normally see. Specifically with this cube, with this slice. At the point of the like, you're seeing where there's kind of going together. This is actually a slice of the inside of them. So it would look like a CT scan or something. But I'm glad you joined. I will probably... So as I said, I saved... at the very beginning, I said that I was planning to kind of save some of my thoughts on time travel for at a time when TMP and hopefully maybe even Ryan would be able to join, because this is helpful for understanding how a single timeline time travel can work, but it doesn't really go into any of the paradoxes and all those fun things. It is certainly fun to actually see that you can actually do it, if you had the power to turn around. That there's like, it's actually, you can simulate it with physics. The trick is that physics operates with a time direction for the most part, and so you becomes harder to do this in real life. But so just in perpetual motion, which was so there would indeed be causality issues because of the direction that entropy works. So I don't believe we will ever have time travel, because I believe that entropy is such a strong part of how our universe works. And I'm okay with that. um, I believe that God has a plan for our universe, and us being able to time travel through it just maybe not something that we need to do. But it's still fun to think about. Um, and ultimately, and this is where the thoughts that I've had on time travel, if you stick to a single timeline, and I have some ideas on how it could be done and still consistent, with the exception of entropy, you wouldn't really be able to change anything. Because this is a static object. There is no animation. Like if I'm playing the animation of time going through it, of this going, slicing time, there is no, this object is not moving. And so there's even more you can do when you go to a 5-dimensional time, which is where the timelines can change. In this 2D world, that would be if I added some keyframes to morph this around in our 4-dimensional, our fourth dimension of time, then it would start affecting, it would be interesting, the things you can do. So there's certainly room there for things you can time travel. How would I even demo 5D? Well, I can't. It would be the same as demoing 4D. We just have to project it or slice it into the 3 dimensions we can actually see, and time. So right now, I'm using the 4th dimension of time to be able to show you this going through here. So I've already used more than 3 dimensions. I'm using this 4th dimension here. To add a time dimension, or to add a 5th dimension, I would have to come up with another tool that would let me use 4D. Basically, I'd have to use the 4D dice roller I was showing earlier. And I'd have to work with the creator of that to start adding 4D animations to it, which would be, that would be a bit much. So here's the 4D. I'll just leave you on this note, which is fun. So here's the 4D toolbox or toy box, and this. Well, this is the tesseract. This is the one I demonstrated where you extrude the cube into the 4th dimension. Well, the nature of how a tesseract is means that it has 8 faces. And it will tell you, technically it's 8 cubes, but it tells you which one's up in this tool. So I actually have a D8 here, and I can roll it and say, I just rolled a 3. I can roll it again. Rolled a 2. Now I just rolled a 7. And there's other polyhedral dice. So this is a D5. It is a polyhedral D5, which looks like a D4. Right now it's sitting on the 4. So it's a tetrahedron that you extrude into a point. So you think of a tetrahedron as a triangle that you extrude into a point. And that's a D4. This is a D5 because we've extruded that into a point. And so now it's laying on its 5th face. And we can go through it to see. So, fun things. Yep, and so you can actually have a D, here's a D120. And I just rolled it, and it landed on a 55. I just rolled it, landed on a 38. Here's a side 47. So there's some fun things you can do with a 4D engine. There would be ways to use it for a 5th dimension, but it's just at that point you're using intuitions that we don't have to understand things that we don't have. So it becomes easier to just stay with 2 dimensions or even 1 dimension sometimes to add the additional dimensions. So you could demonstrate a 5D time with just a point on a line and then it showing how it would change. I think the 2D is the easiest for us to make use of. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed. I hope I was able to stretch your brain just a little bit more. And maybe someday I will make a time travel animation that actually uses these techniques. And I will release the Bad Apple and put a link to the full slice. And thank you for your time and interest and attention. And yes, I'm sorry for keeping you up till 4 a.m. But it is fun. You should tell all your friends what you learned today. Namely, tell people in the stream, in Ryan's stream. Okay, that is actually exactly the 2-hour mark. So I will say farewell.